So I think it's a very tricky thing, because when you start looking at government management, you're looking at citizens. Citizens don't always fully understand how their data is used, how their data needs to be used and processed in order to provide better services. So there's a very heavy component around education and awareness on how governments want to start using the data in a more meaningful way that's going to ultimately improve the overall level of service delivery that municipalities and provincial and national government provide these services, but it is something that we need to move towards. So there's a very big focus on the awareness component, and second to that, once you've gained the trust of these citizens, you need to ensure that you're using it responsibly. So this is making sure that you have sufficient data governance, data privacy, access to data, all of the data security to prevent breaches, have all of these measures in place so that when you're using the data in a meaningful way, you not only are using it in a responsible way and providing these services or enhanced services to the citizens, but you're safeguarding individuals' private data. So I think one of the main things in the last couple of years that we've noticed is that with the pandemic coming through and the need for such a dire objective to be attained, public and private came together very quickly, and they put aside their differences because they knew what the end result would be if they were not to collaborate as they did in many countries. I know in South Africa this was also a prime example. Government and public sector came together, private sector came together very strongly, very collaboratively, and put forward measures to ultimately help South Africans overcome the pandemic. The same sort of common ground needs to be found when it comes to data and AI. I think both public and private sector need to understand that there's a greater component and that there's a greater objective that needs to be attained for citizens across the world, not just in South Africa and across Africa, but across the world. And the only way that this can kind of come to fruition is that if organizations, both public and private, work collaboratively opposed to working against each other. I think you've got to have a very good understanding of individuals that are using the data, that they need to use it in a responsible way. And I'll give you a very simple example. In most countries in the world, actually all countries in the world, you cannot use race as a variable in any credit scoring application because that is discriminatory. But when you start looking at the data and you remove race out of the variables in which to choose from, you still will get an underlying theme that is racially divided coming through the algorithms. You've got to manually offset this because, if you look at a specific group or specific demographic of people, they would reside in a certain area and they would have a certain income and they would have a certain LSM, for example. Now, typically those individuals would get rejected more often for credit, or they'd get lower values, opposed to people that came from a different demographic in a different area, in a more affluent area. So although this exists in the underlying data itself, just by removing those variables doesn't necessarily solve the problem. You need to deliberately create equality across these demographics so that there's a specific number of individuals from each of these population groups that then are given access to credit. So the same thing needs to apply when we start using data and AI. These are the considerations that government and the policies that they need to be putting in place as to how to create ethical algorithms that are coherent, accurate, but also take away some of the biasness that is already inherent in the data. So I think it's a combination of a multitude of different strategies that need to come together. If you looked at 15, 20 years ago, not many people owned a cell phone. Now almost everybody in the world has at least access to a cell phone. They may not necessarily own one themselves, but they've got access to a cell phone, or they've got access to a mobile device. I think that's the first step. We heard earlier today when talking about some of the governments, especially in Azerbaijan, they're looking at making every citizen connected. That would be the second step, crucial step in actually getting individuals both access to mobile devices and access to the internet. Because once you've created those two components, you have the snowball effect where the citizen now has access to a vast amount of information and services that they can start leveraging all of the various different apps and tools and technologies and services that are being offered as part of the fourth industrial revolution. And that data that's then being collected from these individuals can be put back into feedback loops to ultimately help provide better services and higher levels of efficiency.